Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Inward Circle Assembly. I'm so excited to have Christy here today. Christy is a parent of two and a licensed marriage and family therapist who has been practicing in California for over 10 years. She currently works in school-based mental health as a wellness coordinator at a public elementary school. A big part of Christy's role entails discussing self-care with parents and educators. And I had the privilege of my path crossing with Christy through Kimochis, which many of you know is my other thing I do besides self-care, is the SEL side of things. And then I've gotten to know Christy's work in other ways because she has amazing resources for parent self-care on Instagram. And so I've had the pleasure of just watching these many resources and sharing them with families and also using them myself. And so I'm so excited that you're here today. And so I would love first to ask, as an educator, as somebody who works with parents, tell us just your general thoughts on educators who are parents right now and navigating all that is 2020. So just curious on your thoughts of that first.
Wow, that's a big question. So we have my staff. I work in elementary school. Many of us are parents and parents of young kids, right? Not just parents of middle schoolers and high schoolers that can have a lot more independence in terms of doing their distance learning. And it's really rough. I think for most people, they've had to make some hard decisions around safety and the coronavirus, around accepting some help. Because towards the end of last year in our district in Northern California, it was a lot of work, but it was pre-recorded videos and not too much synchronous teaching. And the expectation for synchronous teaching has really skyrocketed this year. And if they have their own kids doing distance learning, or even harder, their own toddlers, I think people are having to make those hard decisions around, do we accept family help again? Do we go back to preschool or daycare? Do we hire a regular babysitter that can come into our home? So I've noticed from my community and my friends that towards the end of the summer, people just started to crack in terms of how much they could do on their own, and they had to make those tough choices. And I think I would say almost everyone in my circle now, where both parents are working, have made that tough decision, and they're having more help, and it is helpful for just our overall well-being. And just like trading tips with other parent friends, I think it's been really reassuring to us that what we've heard from our pediatricians is what we're seeing that concerns us is parents coming in on the brink and weighing that risk around how much you let scary germs into your home through a daycare or a babysitter. Part of that risk factor is your mental health. And so it's been really lovely to see not just my pediatrician, but other pediatricians encourage parents to put that into their decision-making process and to prioritize that.
Yes, we absolutely have to prioritize that. As I'm sitting here almost in the dark because my lights have broken, and we ran into however many issues earlier with different things that happen with tech, and I'm not even on my normal work day. I mean, I work from home with my business, but I'm not in my school right now. So yes, so much to navigate. And so yes, I love that the pediatricians you're talking to are supporting the focus on mental health. And I'm curious if you would be willing to share some of the results of some of your surveys you've been doing too with parents around self-care, because I know you sometimes survey your community. And I'm kind of just wondering, what are some general trends that you're finding?
So I did a survey in April. So this was really right after everything happened with the lockdown in California. So I think if we were to update some of those results, I think, we see even more stress, right? But not surprisingly, we saw like higher levels of burnout, higher levels of stress. The biggest thing that was a stressor for parents was working from home while having the kids, even more so than the distance learning. That was so stressful to feel like a toddler could come into any Zoom meeting and that your ship's passing the night if you do have a partner to try to cover those meetings and do childcare. So that was the number one thing. The number two thing stressing people out was distance learning. And I think that parent guilt, right? Am I doing enough to support my child? And also the reality is you're being asked to do too much, right? And then I was asking about the self-care practices that were really helpful for people. It was all the wonderful things that are the foundation that keep us nourished, right? So it was community, talking with friends, even if it's on Zoom, making sure to try to prioritize sleep and to get some regular exercise. So they were doing those sort of foundational physical and relational self-care practices just to keep them connected and keep them going. The other thing was also just when there was time just to watch a show on Netflix or listen to a podcast. So that was also a big one too. So people were using wonderful skills, but they were very stressed. Interestingly, they did say they felt more connected to their kids because of that. Even though their patience was lower and things were more stressful, just having more time increased that family connection and bond. But it would be interesting to see now, we're in month 7 of the pandemic, are people worried more about losing their patience and more fractured relationships with their kids? Or is there still that feeling that, oof, we're hunkered together, we're in it together, spending more time than ever before together, and feeling a closer bond? I'm not sure how that data would shift.
Yeah, no, that would be very interesting. And I'm also curious how that might look in different parts of the country where there's been a shift back, but it may not be fully, there's just such a range. So what are some, in addition to what you found in the survey and just the general focus on the mental health piece of the puzzle, so we don't get to the brink, and those relational pieces, and also just taking time for ourselves and I will say I'm generally not a TV watcher. It's not my go-to for self-care. And I got to tell you, I have watched more brainless TV during the pandemic because sometimes I'm like, I just need to like totally lose my mind here and just let it, so it's interesting that that's what you found, because it has been something that's been a new self-care strategy for me. But yeah, so what are your other top tips for educators in terms of, well, first of all, let's just start with if they are parents and perhaps they do have to work from home with their kids, or just what, your experience of working with the educators you serve in the school you support. So I'm just curious there.
Yeah, so thinking about parents that are educators, it's funny that we're doing this today because yesterday we just did a 1-hour PD offering for all the educators around self-care and what they're doing. So in some ways, not saying it's easier, but the parents were doing a little bit more self-care because they had to do it with their kids, right? They had maybe dogs and they had to get it for a walk outside before the day started. And what felt really stressful and like there's no time for anything, they had to get outside with their kids. They had to get outside with their dog. And it just helped them start their day with a little bit more clarity and a little bit more grounded. I saw that just in my small group that the educators that didn't have kids weren't doing some of that because there was this pressure to just wake up and go and just focus on their tabs in the Google Classroom and what's uploaded and how's the technology going to go. So an extra challenge in terms of having kids, but I think it also forced them to integrate some of that self-care. So that was neat to see. So the main things I heard time for were like walks around the block, time with pets, and really they talked about sleep. Like just if I can get 6+ hours of sleep, that's a win for me, prioritizing that. Some escapist TV for sure as well. And we talked about sort of the difference between binging that and enjoying that. And I think it's absolutely fine to binge TV, that's fine, but we wouldn't necessarily call that like nourishing or restorative or self-care. So if you're watching Love is Blind until 3 o'clock in the morning and you're peeling your eyes open when school starts, that's not going to help you. But if you want to like enjoy 1 or 2 episodes after, the kids are in bed, absolutely. So it was a lot of those basics. And also they talked about setting alarms for themselves to force themselves to take breaks. So just like we do with kids in the classroom, right? That there's that extra permission that this time is carved out for you.
Yeah, no, and I'm always advocating for people to set some alarms for themselves. So love to hear that is working for people. It's just actually funny, this morning I had this whole interaction with my daughter. I feel a little bit, I just wrote about this in a blog, I feel like Piaget these days, like, because Piaget, most of the theories came from just analyzing his own kids. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's what I'm doing at home all the time right now, since I'm with my kids around the clock pretty much. But my daughter was refusing to take a break, but she was so frustrated and stressed out by what was going on her little, application she had to do for her independent work. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you gotta take a break. It's really important for your brain. And so finally got her talked into taking a break. And then she went back later and was like, gosh, this was so much easier once I took a break. But I feel like it was just a straight mirror for some of the times, my own inner narrative around that. Like, I'll even set a timer because I'm decent about those kinds of things, but then it's so easy for me to just fall back in the old traps of like, no, just, I don't want to take a break. I'm just going to get it done so that it heads off my list. You know, it's so easy for us to fall back into that. So when I saw my daughter do it, I was like, okay, big reminder here.
Yeah.
Our kids teach us so much when if we have our own or our students, they teach us so much.
Yes.
And so what are your favorite tips for what you do? Like, you have kids of your own that are little and you work in school. So what are your top things that you do that are sort of your, either your but both, I guess both your non-negotiables and your things that you add in as time allows?
Yes.
So what's your plan?
So I think, I always feel like saying, 'cause I am just, my heart is with the teachers right now, that the demand of my role looks different and is less demanding than what the teachers are being asked to do. And I am grateful for that and I acknowledge that. My kids are also 6 and 3. So, certainly not in charge of themselves, but I have friends with 1-year-olds and little babies. And I've really had to relax my boundaries around screen time and just try to be more flexible and go with the flow. And just really practicing what I preach, that if I take breaks too, and if that means using screen time and a lot more of it, that's okay. And so I think using screen time has been helpful. We did make the decision to send my youngest back to daycare. So there was a huge, just like sigh of relief in terms of having that support. And then, for me, it's prioritizing sleep. Right now, I'm really into doing digital art with my parent self-care Instagram. I've done art since I was in 1st grade. I had this teacher named Mimi, and it's part of why I think I love working in the elementary schools, but she just gave me positive feedback for my creativity and helped me think of myself as an artist. And so when I think about self-care, and if people haven't practiced for a while, a lot of the things I say is think back to when you were a kid and the things that you did to play, or the things that you did not for a work assignment that were just for fun. And you can sort of start and experiment back with that. So I always come back to art. And when the lockdown happened, I had this really intense need to start drawing and doing art again, because I think it's a really grounding place for me. And then the other thing for me, it's like once the basics are met, and they're not always met, but just making sure to like stay hydrated, eat my meals, like take my breaks too, is staying connected to my friends. That's been the biggest sort of grief for me, is not being able to see my friends in the same way as I did before. So I've put like a call with a really good group of girlfriends on Sunday mornings. It's just a Zoom call. It's in the calendar. We found a time that works for people. Everybody's worked their routine around that. Kids get cartoon time. That's my time to check in with my friends. So I really think about like those basic physical self-care elements, connection with my community. And then for me, art and is a really great place for me to come back to.
And it's clearly serving you well in terms of, not only, I'm sure that the general sense of well-being, but I love all the things that you're creating. They're fantastic. And so the world is definitely benefiting. You're making me think of sort of I'm definitely no art historian, but like the Renaissance or whatever, some art in the history, you probably can speak to it, like came after apparently some major pandemic. And so,
yeah,
so it's like that sometimes when we're in our darkest times, we get more creative. We go back to the root of what creates more flow. So I love that. Art is not my calling, but I love to have a good dance party, and I definitely like to get filled up. So if you see me rolling down the road, bumping it, people like looking at me, that's me over there.
What's your go-to comfort song these days?
Oh gosh. Well, in terms of just like what's going on in our house, we listen to a lot of High Hopes because it's my son's favorite, and I love that song. So we will do some full family performances too right now, where we all get like, there's a couple mics and then pretend mics involved. And then my daughter, we have also upped the screen time a bit because it is what it is. Just accepting that as the fact that the only way me and my husband are able to get sometimes some quiet that we need is just to do that. But my daughter's very into this show that is in Spanish. So there are currently this whole set of Spanish. It's from this show called Go Live It Your Way. It's a little teeny bopper telenovela. It's fantastic. She's almost 10, so it is what it is. So we've been bumping it to a lot of those songs as well. So yeah. Uh-oh, I can't hear you. Oh, there you go. So yeah, so that's where we've been bumping it to. So yeah, nothing modern or anything like that, but no, I love that, and just having people tune into what is at their core in terms of just their passions, their loves, and just giving themselves permission to do that. So critical. And then what, so much of, as educators right now, so many teachers I'm supporting are coming to me because children are coming to them, or parents are coming to them about their children's behaviors, and parents are exhausted, not knowing what to do.
Right.
With their kids struggling to get on with distance learning or go to school or whatever it is, wear a mask or whatever the thing that is a hard time right now. So if you were to have some tips to give teachers and other educators to recommend to families right now, and sort of the top tips, what would you tell teachers that might be some good tips for them to give to those struggling, well, most of us, the families that are having a hard time?
Yeah. Well, and I also say to teachers, I'm really coming at it from that social and emotional lens. So I don't mean to undercut them or undercut the importance of learning, but I think a lot of times we've described this time as a collective trauma for all of us in different ways. And so we know when the brain responds to trauma, it's probably not in the best state to really learn, right? And to really be flexible or to manage those ups and downs. I would say the first thing is safety and connection within the home, and prioritizing that above distance learning. It's been interesting too, because I think we're all, as a therapist, I think sometimes we're sort of used to being in a little bit of a position of power and having these tools and tricks that maybe people don't know, but we are going through this with everyone else. This is the ultimate experience of we are in this together. So it's been interesting to talk to some of my other therapist friends that have kids, and they've really struggled to release academic expectations during this time, even though that intellectual part of them knows that the safety and connection comes first. And so if it is awful, shut the computer down. It's okay. So I think, trying to create some magical moments during this time, not to deny what's happening, but I would go for connection and laughter. I always love, putting this tidbit in too, that with laughter, it activates some of the same brainwave frequencies as meditation. So it's important, it's science. And that can really help us offload a lot of our feelings, and especially the young ones too. So I would say being outside, playing outside, helping them stay connected to their friends if you can, and if people feel safe with that. And family movie nights with hot cocoa and popcorn and snuggles and forts, that I would go for all those family ritual things first. Daniel Siegel, just my idol. He always talks about connect before you correct, right? And so just knowing this situation is created to set up a lot of these behaviors, right? I mean, we're not even made to be on the computer for 8 hours a day straight. So asking these little minds to do that is a setup for behaviors to come out. So I think as long as it's not a safety issue, right? If it's safety and aggressive behavior to make sure kids are safe, just to have a little bit more flexibility with that, to be less focused on the behaviors and more focused on just keeping the lines of communication open and trying to have some playful and fun routines for the family, for everyone.
Yeah, no, I love all of those suggestions. Me and my husband and I just had a very similar conversation around how to support our own kids around this. And it was interesting because we were talking about this for my son, who's definitely had the harder time. He's younger, he recently turned 7, so it's also just makes sense that he's having a harder time than my daughter. But so I'm so focused on the social and emotional side of things, and not that my husband's not, but he's a high school math teacher, so he's definitely on the more academic side of things. And he does definitely see this value, but he was also, we were having this discussion about, well, does that put more pressure on my son's teacher if we're not sort of prioritizing the academics? Are we sort of undermining all the work that that teacher's doing. And I get it, because he has an amazing teacher, and I know she's working so hard to create as optimal of a situation as she can. You know, she's definitely making lemonade out of lemons, kind of a thing. And but still, you know, ultimately, you know, and I wouldn't say we resolved where we are with this issue, but we're having this discussion around, you know, where the priority is. But while you were talking, it made me think that if we can come at it as from the educator perspective and supporting our parents in that message, it also just takes some of the pressure off of the educators. It's not, you know, so it's like ultimately we can report to an administrator or anyone who's like kind of putting that top down pressure on right now, and that some, you know, some educators are putting on themselves, but that it's, you know, if that's what a family needs, that's what they need. It doesn't mean there's anything about what the educator did wrong. It's just that that's what the child needs, because this is not a normal developmentally, this is not how we're developmentally wired. Especially, you know, kids are not developmentally wired to be in the middle of a pandemic. So yeah, so that while you were talking, that's kind of what was going through my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but yeah, just anything we can to really just keep focusing on the social emotional part for all of us. Well, I loved all your tips. I love that you're just the support of the educators, but also just the parent piece from the educator parent side of things for other, you know, parents we work with. So I would love to hear you share with everyone about just a little bit more about what you put out there in the world in terms of your Instagram and your offerings, and what sort of what you're working on right now. I know you've got some projects, so I would love to hear that, because everybody who's watching this, you all need to follow Christy, because she's got amazing stuff.
Oh, thank you so much, Katie. And I think before I shift gears in that, I remembered one really sweet story from yesterday. Is it okay if I share that?
Of course.
I couldn't have made it go any better. So one of the teachers was sharing about, well, they were all sharing about that push, the ones that were parents, of it doesn't feel good to shortchange my child's education, and it doesn't feel good to shortchange my students. So where do you want me to pick here? Because I have this unrealistic load that's being asked of me. And one of the teachers said, she's like, I'm just not going to make it if I don't take care of myself. And so I have to, you know, she's the one who's really big on timers. So she said, I set a limit on how much I was going to do. And if that meant that some of the lessons weren't just the way I wanted it, that was how it was going to be for the next day. And I sort of held my breath a little bit, and I said, okay, well, how did it go the next day? Was it better than you thought, how you thought, or did it go worse than you thought? And she said, it was better because I was relaxed and we played more games, and I was talking with them in the chat, and I could just feel their energy shift because my energy was different. And I know it might not be like that every day, but at least for me, the teachers I work with have such high standards for themselves, and they're such hard workers. I always say that nobody could accuse you of not being compassionate and caring about your kids and not being an amazing educator. So if you took it from 120 down to 95, it's still going to be great, and maybe you're going to feel even better. So that was just a nice way to wrap up yesterday. And I can't promise that it's going to be everybody's experience every time, but hopefully, you know, other people will experience what she did as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That reminds me of, I just watched this little video on YouTube. Michael Moore is, I think, making a documentary about the education system in Finland. And it just kind of reminded me, it's amazing, right? But, you know, we used to have the same exact educational sort of levels as the kids in Finland, you know, 40 years ago or whatever. And then now they're like all the way up to the top. And, you know, they, in person on a regular basis, not in the middle of a pandemic, they only do either 3 or 4 hours of school a day. The rest of the day is educators just working together and collaborating. And school is very, you know, so much arts and music and all of those things, and so driven by whatever the kids need, and not so much, there's no test there, there's no standardized test, there's no homework. So in some ways it feels like, wow, have they just like totally lowered all expectations? But the kids are all thriving. I mean, there's obviously other layers to it. There's, you know, it's 100% public school. There's so there's not that variation in school funding and all those kinds of things. So there's a whole, I'm definitely oversimplifying it. Don't, you know, but but the fact that sometimes there is so much power to lowering, just like what your teacher did, it doesn't mean that you're not still giving your kids just as much as you would in this other model. And we do have to think creatively about how to get through, just like, I forget what she said, but I'm not going to survive, or I'm not going to make it if I don't start taking care of myself.
I don't, dial back these expectations. So
yeah. Expectations are huge. Yeah. So yeah, definitely lowering them is a powerful one. That's a parental lesson in general, I suppose, that I had to learn when I became a mom. But yeah, educator moms in particular, big one right now. Yeah. Well, this is so many little fun tidbits to think about, and just such a pleasure to have this conversation with you. So yeah, so tell us how to stay connected with you.
Sure. Yeah. So I Parent Self-Care on Instagram. I have a blog, just the same thing, parentselfcare.com. I just started a podcast called The Mental Mile, and it's about all things parenthood, career, and wellness. So I love doing parent self-care because it focuses on taking care of the parents instead of getting into suggestions around how to raise your kids, which I certainly have opinions about and have things that work for me, but I think something more of us can agree on is just the better we take care of ourselves, the better we're going to show up for our kids. We can be more flexible. We can trust our intuition. We can remember all those great tips and tricks that we've picked up just from talking with other parents, or things that we've read when we're not so stressed out. So that's where you can find me and check out more of my resources. And I know we do a lot with mindfulness here. I have a love for that as well. So you'll find, mindfulness and meditation on there as well.
Yeah, and seriously, y'all gotta check out Christy's stuff. There's so many great little pictures and that you're creating that just really capture in really simple ways what people can tap into, and so it's such a great resource for families, and for colleagues to just have little friendly reminders. So I'm so grateful for all the work that you're putting out into the world. Not necessarily, thrilled that we're having a pandemic, but if that brought on more of your art, I am grateful for that. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us, and may you all bring this wisdom, these tips into your world if you're a parent, and even if not, either way, bring it into the worlds of the families that you serve. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye.